The storm before the breakthrough, December 16, 1944. The Ardennes forest lay buried beneath thick winter fog. Snow clung to the branches of pine trees, and the narrow roads of Belgium were frozen solid. To the American soldiers stationed there, it seemed like the quietest sector of the Western Front. Too quiet. For months, Allied commanders believed Germany was finished. After the Normandy landings in June and the liberation of Paris in August, the Wehrmacht had been pushed steadily back to its own borders. Fuel was scarce, factories were bombed daily, German divisions were shattered and exhausted. Most Allied officers believed the war in Europe would end by spring, but Adolf Hitler had one last plan, a desperate gamble, a massive counteroffensive that he believed could change the course of the war. Operation Wacht im Rainwatch on Rhine. At 5:30 in the morning, the silence of the Ardennes exploded. More than 1,600 German artillery guns opened fire simultaneously. The earth shook beneath the barrage as shells crashed into American positions across an 80-mile front. Forests splintered, bunkers collapsed. Communication lines were severed in seconds. American soldiers, many of them inexperienced replacements, woke to chaos. Phones were dead, command posts were destroyed, roads were blocked with burning vehicles. And through the smoke and snow came the sound every Allied soldier feared most. Tank engines. Hundreds of German Panzer tanks rolled forward through the forest. Panthers, Panzer IVs, Tiger tanks. Behind them marched more than 200,000 German soldiers. The largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940 had begun. The target was simple but incredibly ambitious. Break through the thin American lines in the Ardennes, race west toward the Meuse River, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and split the Allied armies in half. If the plan worked, Britain and the United States might be forced to negotiate peace with Germany. It was Hitler's final attempt to turn defeat into victory. And for the first 3 days, it almost worked. American units in the Ardennes were spread thin, many resting after months of combat. Some divisions had little combat experience, others were understrength and poorly equipped. The German assault hit them like a hammer. Entire American regiments were surrounded, roads filled with refugees fleeing west. Supply trucks crashed into each other trying to escape advancing tanks. Soldiers fought desperately, scattered pockets of resistance, but the German advance was relentless. Within 48 hours, German Panzer divisions had punched a massive bulge into Allied lines. The battle would soon be known as the Battle of the Bulge. Among the advancing German forces was one of the most experienced armored formations in the Wehrmacht, the 2nd Panzer Division. These were veterans. I had fought in France in 1940. They had battled Soviet armies on the Eastern Front. They had survived the brutal Normandy. Their commanders were confident, their crews were battle-hardened, and now they had a single objective. Reach the Meuse River before American reinforcements could stop them. The distance was about 40 miles. Under normal conditions, a Panzer division could cover that in a single day. But nothing about the Ardennes offensive would be normal. By December 18th, German armored columns were pushing deeper into Belgium. American resistance was fierce but disorganized. Many units fought brave, but they were outnumbered and often cut off from command. Weather helped the Germans. Heavy clouds grounded Allied aircraft. Without fighter bombers attacking from the sky, German tanks could move freely. Convoys stretched for miles. Panzer columns wound through narrow forest roads like steel serpents, engines rumbling through the snow. German commanders believed victory was within reach. But war is rarely decided by plans. Sometimes it is decided by moments when a handful of soldiers refuse to retreat. Moments when one decision changes everything. And on December 19, 1944, near a quiet Belgian crossroads, outside the village of Foy-Notre-Dame, such a moment was about to unfold. Far ahead of the advancing German columns, American commanders were desperately trying to slow the offensive. They had few options. Units were shattered. Communication lines were unreliable. Reinforcements were still hours or days away, so they relied on something simple but effective. Roadblocks. Small groups of tanks, infantry, and tank destroyers were ordered to hold key intersections and choke points as long as possible. Not to win, just to delay. Every hour mattered. Every minute bought time for reinforcements to arrive. One of those blocking positions was assigned to a Sherman tank crew from the 9th Armored Division. Their tank was an M4 Sherman, the most common American tank of World War II. It wasn't the most powerful tank on the battlefield, German Panzer, and Tigers had thicker armor and more powerful guns, but the Sherman had advantages. It was fast, easy to repair, and when crewed by experienced soldiers, it could be deadly. This particular Sherman had a nickname painted on its hull, Colorado Kid. Its commander was Staff Sergeant William M.C. Warder, a 24-year-old tanker from Denver, Colorado. M.C. Warder had already seen months of combat in Europe. He knew the strengths and weaknesses of the Sherman. He knew what German tanks could do. He knew how quickly a battle could turn deadly. His crew trusted him completely. Corporal James Rothwell, the gunner, was responsible for aiming and firing the tank's 75mm cannon. Private First Class Tony Caserta, only 19 years old, served as the loader, ramming shells into the gun under intense pressure. Private Eugene DeLeo, the driver, controlled the 30-ton machine through mud, snow, and enemy fire. Together, the four men formed a team that had survived months of war. On the morning of December 19th, they received their orders. Move to a crossroads southeast of Dinant. Establish a blocking position. Hold as long as possible. Then fall back before being overrun. Simple instructions, but war rarely follows simple plans. By midday, Colorado Kid reached the crossroads. It was little more than two narrow roads intersecting between open fields. A stone wall ran along one side of the road. Beyond it lay frozen farmland and scattered trees. Not an ideal defensive position, but it was the best they had. M.C. Warder positioned the Sherman behind the stone wall, angling the hull to maximize its armor protection. Branches were cut and draped over the tank to camouflage its outline. Ammunition was stacked within easy reach inside the turret. Machine guns were checked. The crew waited. Snow began to fall again. The temperature dropped below freezing. Hours passed. Then in the distance they heard it. Engines, many engines. Through his periscope, M.C. Warder saw movement on the road to the east. Motorcycles, German reconnaissance scouts, the first sign that the storm was coming. The scouts slowed near the crossroads, scanning the fields carefully. If they spotted the Sherman, the entire German column would open fire immediately. McWarder held his breath. Inside the tank, no one moved. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, the motorcycles turned around and disappeared back down the road. The Germans hadn't seen them, but they would soon, because behind those scouts kept main force. And when it arrived, 4 American soldiers in one Sherman tank would face something almost impossible. An entire German Panzer division advancing straight toward them. The crossroads would soon become a battlefield, and the fate of the battle might depend on what those 4 men chose to do next. December 19th, 1944, Belgium, near the village of Foy-Notre-Dame, inside the Sherman tank Colorado Kid. The 4 American soldiers waited in silence. The snow had grown heavier, drifting slow. Across the empty farmland, the crossroads looked calm, almost peaceful. But far away, beneath the wind and the whispering snow, another sound began to grow louder. Engines, deep, powerful engines. The sound rolled across the frozen countryside like distant thunder. Staff Sergeant William M.C. Warder leaned forward slightly, peering through his periscope. His breath fogged the metal interior of the turret. He didn't need to say anything. The rest of the crew could hear too. Gunner James Rothwell tightened his grip on the firing controls. Loader Tony Caserta rested his hand on a 75mm armor-piercing shell. Driver Eugene DeLeo kept the Sherman's engine idling quietly, ready to move if needed, but they all knew something important. If the Germans spotted them first, moving wouldn't matter, because the road ahead of them was about to fill with enemy armor, and there was only one American tank waiting at the crossroads. Minutes later, the first German vehicles appeared, motorcycles. Again, 2 of them with sidecars. German reconnaissance scouts. The motorcycles sped down the road, snow spraying behind their wheels. One of the soldiers raised binoculars, scanning the fields carefully. Inside the Sherman, the crew stayed perfectly still. The scouts slowed only 400 yards from the crossroads. For a moment, it looked like they might notice the tank hidden behind the stone wall. McWarder's hand hovered near the intercom switch. If the Germans discovered them, he would order Rothwell to fire immediately. But then something unexpected happened. The scouts lowered their binoculars. After a brief pause, they turned their motorcycles around and drove back the way they had come. They had not seen the Sherman. For a few seconds, nobody inside the tank spoke. Then MC Warder finally said quietly into the intercom, "All right, boys, they're coming." And they were. 10 minutes later, the German column arrived. First came a Panzer IV tank rolling slowly around the bend in the road. Behind it came another and another. Then larger shapes appeared through the falling snow. Panther tanks, their long 75mm guns pointed forward like spears. Behind them came half-tracks loaded with Panzer Grenadier infantry. Supply trucks followed, more tanks, more vehicles. The column stretched farther than MC Warder could see. The 2nd Panzer Division was moving west, straight toward the crossroads. Rothwell whispered quietly, "Jesus, that's a lot of tanks." MC Warder watched carefully. Through his optics, he began counting 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time he reached 16 tanks, he stopped counting. There were too many. If the Germans reached the crossroads, they would continue west toward the Meuse River bridges. And once they crossed the Meuse, the road to Antwerp would be open. That was the entire goal of Hitler's offensive. And at this moment, the only thing standing in their way was one American German. The German column moved cautiously. The lead Panzer approached the intersection slowly. German commanders knew the Americans might set up roadblocks. They expected mines, anti-tank guns, tank destroyers hidden in the woods, but they did not expect to face a single Sherman. At 800 yards, the lead Panzer IV suddenly stopped. Its turret began turning. The German commander had spotted something, maybe the outline of the tank, maybe the gun barrel, maybe a reflection in the snow, whatever it was. The element of surprise was gone. Inside Colorado Kid, MC Warder spoke calmly. "Rothwell, target the lead tank." The gunner aligned the crosshairs. His breathing slowed. Caserta slid an armor-piercing shell into the bridge. Up! The German tank fired first. The shell screamed through the air. It passed just over the Sherman and exploded behind it in the frozen field. The Germans had fired too quickly. They had missed. McWhorter didn't hesitate to fire. The Sherman's cannon roared. The entire tank rocked backward as the gun discharged. Armor-piercing rounds slammed into the front of the Panzer IV. For a split second, nothing happened. Then smoke burst from the German tank's engine deck. The turret hatch flew open. German crewmen scrambled out, diving into the snow. The tank burned fiercely. First goal. The German column immediately halted. Standard German doctrine required stopping whenever the lead vehicle was destroyed. Commanders feared mines or ambushes. The narrow road became clogged with vehicles, tanks behind the burn. Panzer IV couldn't move forward. Drivers tried to reverse. Officers shouted orders. Confusion spread through the column. Inside the Sherman, Rothwell was already reloading. Caserta shoved another shell into the breach. Up! Another Panzer IV attempted to drive off the road and flank the American position, but the frozen field hit a shallow drainage ditch beneath the snow. The heavy German tank slid sideways. Its tracks spun uselessly. The vehicle became stuck. MC Warder saw the opportunity. Immediately took it. Rothwell fired again. The shell struck the turret. The Panzer IV exploded into flames. Second kill. Now the German commanders realized something important. There was a well-positioned American tank controlling the crossroads, and it was extremely dangerous. But what they didn't know yet was that it was the only one. More German tanks began deploying from the road. Infantry jumped from half-tracks and spread across the fields. The battle had truly begun. Shape rolled forward through the smoke, larger, lower, more powerful. A Panther tank. The Panther was one of the most feared tanks of the war. Its frontal armor could easily withstand the Sherman's gun, and its long cannon could destroy a Sherman from more than a mile away. Inside Colorado Kid, everyone understood the danger. If the Panther landed a direct hit, the fight would be over instantly. McWhorter knew they needed the perfect shot. The Panther advanced slowly down the road. Aggressive. Its commander likely believed the American position consisted of several tanks. But the Panther commander made a critical mistake. Instead of waiting for infantry to scout ahead, he pushed forward alone. At 300 yards, the Panther fired. The shell slammed into the Sherman's front armor. Inside the tank, the impact sounded like a giant hammer striking steel. The entire crew was thrown sideways, but the armor held. The round ricocheted upward and flew over the turret. McWhorter shouted. Immediately, Rothwell. The gunner was already adjusting his aim. The Panther's front armor was too thick, but its side armor was weaker. The German commander tried to angle his tank slightly, and for a single moment the Panther exposed its side. That was all Rothwell needed. Firing, the Sherman's cannon thundered again. The shell struck the Panther's side. Oh, then the impossible happened. The round penetrated. Inside the Panther, ammunition stored along the hull detonated. The explosion was massive. Flames erupted from every hatch. The turret was blown partially loose by the blast. Black smoke rose into the gray winter sky. Third hill. For several seconds, the battlefield fell silent. German soldiers stared at the burning wrecks blocking the road. 3 tanks destroyed. And the Americans had only fired 3 shots. German officers quickly gathered further down the road. They were trying to understand what had happened. Recon reports suggested a strong American armored force was blocking the intersection, but observers could only see 1 tank. That didn't make sense. No commander would place a single tank to defend a critical crossroads. There had to be more hidden tanks, anti-tank guns, maybe tank destroyers waiting in the woods. The Germans began reorganizing for a full attack. Inside Colorado Kid, the crew finally had a moment to breathe. But the situation was about to get worse, because during the Panther's near miss, Sherman had taken damage, and they didn't realize just how serious it was yet. Caserta climbed partially down into the hull. He checked the mechanical systems quickly, then his voice came over the intercom. "Sergeant, we've got a problem." MC Warder looked down. "What kind of problem?" Caserta hesitated. "The right track is on. Panther's shell had damaged the suspension and thrown the track completely off. Colorado Kid could still fire, but it could no longer move. The Sherman had become a stationary bunker, an immobilized target, and outside, an entire German Panzer division was preparing to attack. December 19, 1944, Belgium, the crossroads near Foy-Notre-Dame, inside the Sherman, Colorado Kid. The mood had changed. Just minutes earlier, the crew had destroyed 3 German tanks and stopped the advance of an entire Panzer column. But now they understood the truth. Their tank could no longer move. The right track had been torn away by the near miss from the Panther's shell. Without it, the Sherman was stuck behind the stone wall like a wounded animal. Driver Eugene DeLeo tried the controls anyway. The engine roared. The left track spun violently in the snow. But the tank only lurched slightly and then settled back into the frozen ground. They were immobilized. Commander William MC Warder quickly understood the situation. If the Germans discovered the Sherman couldn't move, they would simply surround it and destroy it. And the German column waiting down the road contained dozens of tanks under normal circumstances. American tank doctrine was clear. If a tank became immobilized in the face of overwhelming enemy forces, the crew should abandon it. Destroy the vehicle if possible, then escape back to friendly lines. A trained tank crew was more valuable than a damaged tank. Mac Warder knew this. Every tanker knew this, but there was a problem: the crossroads. If the Sherman crew abandoned their position now, nothing would stop the German column from continuing west. And beyond this crossroads lay American supply routes, fuel convoys, infantry units, artillery batteries. If the 2nd Panzer Division broke through here, they could reach the Meuse River bridges by morning. And once the Germans crossed the Meuse, the entire Allied front could collapse. Mac Warder looked at his crew inside the cramped metal interior of the Sherman. Their faces were pale under the dim red lights. They had all heard Caserta's report. They knew the tank couldn't move. Mac Warder spoke quietly. "We can still..." Nobody answered immediately. Gunner James Rothwell finally said what they were all thinking. "How long?" MC Warder looked through the periscope at the German column forming in the distance. "Long as we can." It wasn't a speech, it wasn't heroic, it was simply the truth. He then said something important. "If anyone wants to bail out, now's the time." No one moved. Loader Tony Caserta, the youngest member of the crew, shook his head. "We stay." Driver DeLeo nodded slowly. "Yeah." "We check the cannon sights again. I'm not done shooting." Mac Warder gave a short nod. "All right then." Outside, the Germans were preparing their next attack. German officers now believed they were facing a strong American defensive position. They had seen 3 tanks destroyed in only minutes. No experienced commander would place a single tank alone at such a critical crossroads. There had to be more American armor hidden nearby, but the German timetable was tight. They needed to reach the Meuse River within 24 hours. Every delay mattered. The German battalion commander ordered a combined attack. Infantry would advance first. Then tanks would move in to finish the jobs. The attack began. German Panzer Grenadiers climbed from their half-tracks and spread across the snow-covered fields. Dozens of soldiers moved carefully through the drifting snow, rifles ready. Inside Colorado Kid, Mac Warder watched them approach. Machine guns, both the turret machine gun and the bow machine gun, opened fire. The sound inside the tank was deafening. Streams of bullets tore across the frozen fields. German infantry dropped into the snow, scrambling for cover. Some fired back with rifles and machine guns, but the open ground left them exposed. Caserta fed ammunition belts into the machine guns while DeLeo fired from the hull. Several German soldiers fell. The rest retreated behind the burning tanks. The 1st Infantry assault had failed, but the Germans weren't finished. Soon another tank moved forward. A Panzer IV firing high explosive shells. The shells slammed into the stone wall protecting the Sherman. Chunks of rock exploded into the air. Shrapnel rang loudly against the tank's armor. Inside, the crew flinched with every impact. The explosions were powerful enough to shake the entire vehicle, but the armor held. Between German shots, Rothwell carefully aimed, target ready. MC Warder gave the order, fire. The Sherman's gun thundered again. The shell struck the 4th squarely in the turret. The German tank burst into flames. 4th kill. But the Germans now understood something. This American tank was extremely dangerous, and it had to be destroyed. The German commander ordered heavier weapons forward. Within an hour, the most feared weapon on the battlefield arrived. The 88mm anti-tank gun. Originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, the 88 had become one of the deadliest anti-tank guns of the war. It could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away, and it could penetrate American armor with ease. German crews quickly set up the gun nearly 2 kilometers away, far beyond the Sherman's effective range. Inside Colorado Kid, Mac Warder saw them through his optics, and he knew exactly what it meant. They were about to be destroyed. The first shell landed near the crossroads with a thunderous explosion. Frozen earth blasted into the air. The second shell struck the stone wall. Half of the wall collapsed instantly. The Sherman's cover was disappearing. The third shell struck the turret directly. The impact was terrifying. Inside the tank, the crew felt the steel bend under the force. For a split second, everyone believed the shell had penetrated, but something strange happened. The shell had punched through the turret roof and failed to explode. German ammunition quality had declined late in the war due to rush production and sabotage in factories. This shell should have killed the entire crew instantly. Instead, saved them, but the impact caused serious damage. Gunner Rothwell inspected the cannon mechanism. His face turned grim. Sergeant, the breech is cracked. MC Warder understood immediately. The cannon might fire one more time, but if they fired again, the gun could explode inside the turret. Fragments would tear through the crew compartment. It would be suicide. Colorado Kid had become a steel bunker with one final shot remaining. Outside, the German 88 prepared another volley. Then unexpected happened. The weather changed. The snowstorm intensified rapidly. Within minutes, visibility dropped to less than 200 yards. German artillery observers could no longer see the Sherman. The 88 gun stopped firing. The battlefield grew strangely quiet. Inside the tank, the crew sat in silence. They ate small pieces of frozen rations, drank water from metal canteens. No one spoke about what was coming next, because they all knew soon the snow would clear and the Germans would again, this time with overwhelming force. 5 Panthers infantry, artillery support, and one broken Sherman with only one shot left. The battle for the crossroads was not over. In fact, the most dangerous moment was still ahead. December 19th, 1944, late afternoon, the frozen crossroads near Foy-Notre-Dame, Belgium. The snowstorm slowly began to fade. For nearly 30 minutes, the battlefield had been silent. Inside the Sherman Colorado Kid, the crew waited in tense silence. They knew what would happen when the visibility returned. The Germans would attack again, and this time they would come with overwhelming force. Staff Sergeant William X. Warder watched the white fog slowly lift through his periscope. Shapes were beginning to appear again in the distance. Dark shapes, moving shapes, German tanks, a lot of them. MC Warder counted slowly. 1 Panther, then another, then a third. 5 Panthers were spreading across the open field. Behind them came half-tracks loaded with infantry. Commanders had decided on a simple solution. They would crush the American position with brute force. Inside the Sherman, the situation was desperate. The tank was immobilized, the radio was destroyed, and the main gun could only fire one more time. If the gun exploded when fired, the crew would die instantly. If they didn't fire, the Panthers would simply destroy them. Gunner James Rothwell stared at the damaged cannon. He knew the risk, but he also knew something else. They had come this. They had already stopped the German column for hours, and just maybe, one more shot could delay them even longer. McWhorter spoke calmly over the intercom. Rothwell, save the shot for the closest Panther. The gunner nodded. Loader Tony Caserta lifted the final armor-piercing shell and slid it carefully into the breech. Driver Eugene DeLeo wiped sweat from his face. Even in the freezing cold, the inside of the Sherman felt like an oven after hours of combat. Outside the German tanks advanced slowly through the snow, their long guns pointed directly at the crossroads. The Panthers moved in a wide line formation. They were making sure the Sherman could not escape. German infantry followed cautiously behind the tanks, rifles ready. Everyone expected the American tank to fire soon, but the Sherman remained silent. Inside Colorado Kid McWhorter waited patiently. He knew something about German tank crews. Confidence often made them careless. If the Panther commanders are still in the game, believed the American tank was disabled, they might move closer. Closer meant a better chance to penetrate their armor. The distance slowly closed. 400 yards, 350 yards. The Panthers kept advancing. 300 yards. The Sherman's damaged turret turned slowly, cranked manually by Rothwell. Every movement was slower now, but steady. The crosshairs settled on the center Panther. 250 yards. German infantry were now clearly visible behind the tanks. Rifles pointed toward Sherman, machine guns. The battlefield had become deadly quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. Inside the Sherman, MC Warder placed his finger on the firing switch. This was the moment. If the cannon failed, the turret would become a steel coffin, but if the shot worked, they might destroy one more German tank, McWhorter whispered. The Sherman's cannon exploded with thunder. For a fraction of a second, everyone inside the tank feared the worst. Metal screamed, the turret shook violently, but the cannon held up. Shell flew straight toward the advancing Panther. It struck low on the hull near the engine compartment. Then flames erupted from the rear of the German tank. The Panther stopped, then burst into fire. Fifth hill. But the other German tanks kept advancing. 4 Panthers now aimed their cannons directly at the Sherman. Their commanders were furious. One American tank had destroyed 5 German vehicles and delayed their advance for hours. That was enough. They prepared to fire inside. Colorado Kid McWhorter knew the fight was over. The main gun was unusable. The Sherman could not move. The Panthers were about to destroy them. He opened the turret hatch slightly. Get ready to bail. The crew prepared themselves. If the tank was hit, they would try to escape through the hatch and run for cover. But before the German tanks could fire, something unexpected happened. A distant rumble rolled across the battlefield. Not tank engines, artillery. Then the first shells landed. Massive explosions erupted among the advancing German tanks. The ground shook violently. Shells rained down across the field. American heavy artillery batteries had opened fire. Shell after shell crashed into the German formation. One Panther took a direct hit. The explosion blasted its turret off completely. Another tank lost its track and spun sideways. German infantry scattered in panic. The carefully organized attack collapsed instantly. Inside Colorado Kid, the crew stared in disbelief. McWhorter had no idea who had called the artillery strike. Their radio was destroyed. They had no way to communicate, but somewhere behind the American lines, an artillery observer had seen the German column approaching, and he had acted quickly. The artillery barrage was devastating. Within minutes, the German attack dissolved into chaos. Panthers began reversing. Half-tacks turned around. Infantry ran back toward the safety of the forest. The entire advance stopped. The crossroads fell silent. Burning tanks lit the snowy fields with orange flames. Smoke drifted slowly into the cold evening sky. For the first time in hours, the Sherman crew realized something incredible. They had survived. They had held the crossroads for nearly 6 hours. And they had delayed an entire Panzer division, but help was finally arriving. From the west came the sound of American engines. New vehicles appeared on the road. Tank destroyers. American M10 tank destroyers from the 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion rolled toward the crossroads. Their crews expected to find a massive German breakthrough. Instead, they found something unbelievable. 5 destroyed German tanks, dozens of shell craters, and one immobilized Sherman sitting quietly behind a shattered stone wall. The commander of the lead M10 climbed out of his vehicle. He approached the Sherman carefully. The hatch opened. McWhorter slowly climbed out, exhausted, covered in grease and smoke. The officer looked around the battlefield, then back at the Sherman crew. He asked one simple question: how long have you been holding this position? Mackwater checked his watch, then answered calmly, "About 5.5 hours." The officer stared at the destroyed German tanks again, then back at the four tired soldiers. For a moment he didn't say anything. Finally he shook his head slowly. "You boys just stopped a Panzer division. Evening, December 19th, 1944. The snow-covered crossroads near Foy Notre Dame was finally quiet. The roar of engines had faded. The explosions had stopped. Only the crackling of burning tanks broke the silence. Black smoke drifted slowly into the cold Belgian sky. For nearly 6 hours, one American Sherman tank had stood alone at this crossroads, holding back the advance of an entire German armored column. Now the battlefield told the story. Destroyed German tanks burned along the road. Shell craters scarred the frozen farmland. Abandoned weapons and damaged vehicles lay scattered everywhere. Of it all sat the crippled Sherman tank Colorado Kid, its track torn off, its turret damaged, its gun barrel still smoking from the final shot. But the most important thing was this: the crew was alive. All four of them: Staff Sergeant William X. E. Warder, the commander; Corporal James Rothwell, the gunner; Private First Class Tony Caserta, the loader; Private Eugene DeLeo, the driver. When the American M10 tank destroyers arrived, their crews could hardly believe what they were seeing. The commander of the first M10 walked slowly around the battlefield, examining the destroyed German tanks. He counted them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 German tanks destroyed by a single Sherman crew. He turned back toward MC Warder. "You did this?" MC Warder simply nodded. The officer looked around again. It didn't make sense. No single tank should have been able to stop an entire Panzer column for that long. But the evidence was right there in front of him. Sometimes war produces moments. Even experienced soldiers struggled to understand. This was one of them. The M10 tank destroyers quickly moved into defensive positions around the crossroads. Their powerful 3-inch guns now covered the road that the German panzers had tried to use. American artillery batteries remained ready behind the lines. If the Germans attacked again, they would face a much stronger defense, but the German commanders had already made their decision. The delay had ruined their schedule. The advance toward the Meuse River was no longer possible. Reinforcements were arriving. The surprise was gone. The momentum had been lost. The 2nd Panzer Division withdrew. The crossroads remained in American hands. Meanwhile, the crew of Colorado Kid was finally evacuated. Medics examined them quickly. Hours inside the cramped tank had taken their toll. Tony Caserta had minor shrapnel wounds. Eugene DeLeo's hearing was partially damaged from the constant explosions. James Rothwell's hands were burned from hot shell casings. And William X. E. Warder was nearly collapsing from exhaustion and dehydration, but they were alive, which under those circumstances was almost unbelievable. They were taken to a nearby field hospital where doctors gave them food, water, and rest. For the first time since the battle began, the crew could finally relax. But the war around them was still raging. The Battle of the Bulge continued for weeks. Across the Ardennes forest, American soldiers fought desperately to stop the German offensive. One of the most famous battles occurred in the town of Bastogne, where the American 101st Airborne Division was surrounded but refused to surrender. The fighting was brutal. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snowstorms covered the battlefield. Both sides suffered enormous casualties, but slowly the German offensive began to fail. Allied reinforcements poured into the Ardennes as American and British units launched counterattacks. Fuel shortages crippled German armor divisions. And Allied aircraft finally returned to the skies once the weather cleared. By January 1945, the German advance had been completely stopped. The Battle of the Bulge was over. It would become the largest battle ever fought by the United States Army, and one of the final major German offensives of the war. For the crew of Colorado Kid, the story continued. Their actions at the crossroads did not go unnoticed. Their commanding officers filed detailed reports describing the incredible stand they had made against the German advance. Weeks later, during a ceremony held in a snow-covered field near Bastogne, the crew received their awards. The ceremony was conducted by one of the most famous American generals of the war. George S. Patton personally pinned the medals onto their uniforms. Staff Sergeant William X. Warder received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for extraordinary heroism. The other crew members, Rothwell, Caserta, and DeLeo, were each awarded the Silver Star. During the ceremony, Patton asked McWhorter a simple question. What made you stay at that crossroads when your tank was disabled? McWhorter thought for a moment. Then he gave an answer that surprised everyone. Someone had to hold it. Patton nodded slowly. That's the best answer I've heard all week. After recovering from their injuries, the 4 men were assigned to a replacement Sherman tank. They named it Colorado Kid 2. Together they fought through the final months of the war. They crossed the Rhine River. They advanced deep into Germany. And when the war in Europe finally ended in May 1945, all 4 of them were still alive. After the war, they returned home. Like many veterans of World War II, they rarely spoke about their experiences. McWhorter went back to Denver, Colorado. He worked construction, raised a family, and lived a quiet life. Rothwell became a teacher in Ohio. Caserta and DeLeo remained close friends and occasionally met to talk about the war. But even among veterans, the story of the Sherman that stopped a Panzer column became something of a legend. Years later, historians studying the Battle of the Bulge discovered references to the event in captured German documents. Interestingly, German reports described the crossroads as being defended by multiple American tanks and strong anti-tank defenses. The idea that a single disabled Sherman had stopped them seemed impossible, so they assumed there must have been more. But the truth was much simpler. 4 soldiers, 1 damaged tank, and a decision to stay when leaving would have been easier. Today, the crossroads near Foy-Notre-Dame looks peaceful. Farm fields stretch across the landscape. Cars drive quietly along the narrow roads. Nothing remains of the battle that once took place there, but history remembers. Because sometimes the biggest moments in war are not decided by generals or massive armies. Sometimes they are decided by a few individuals making difficult choices in impossible situations. And on one cold December afternoon in 1944, 4 American tankers proved that courage can change the course of history. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more incredible true stories from World War II, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us uncover forgotten battles, heroic soldiers,